Hello and welcome back to freephotoshop.com and this intensive guide looking at the levels command here inside Adobe Photoshop. In the previous video we looked at the auto and options buttons here inside levels, and then I started telling you about sometimes losing a little saturation from the image when applying levels because you're shifting brightness values and generally increasing contrast. And here inside this photograph that incidentally we modified in the previous video, we have perhaps a lack of saturation. At the moment, the light from the low sun is pouring on a rich yellow-orange cast onto the rocks, and I want to make that more intense. I want the colours inside the canyon walls here to really pop off the screen. So in order to do that, I'm going to come down here to the adjustments layer icon inside the layers palette just at the bottom here, and I'm going to select the hue saturation adjustment layer from the pop-up menu. Now what I'm going to do here is shift tab to the saturation controls. Then I'm going to hold down the shift key and press the up arrow twice to increase the saturation to +20. And things are looking fairly good on screen. I urge you to make your own mind up as to how much saturation you want to add to the image or your own image if you're working with your own images. And I'm going to stick with around +20 and hit OK to accept that change. Now what we just did isn't really anything to do with levels, and that's because we don't have any way of increasing saturation alone inside the levels dialog box. Even if we were to switch to the lab color mode, which we will be doing later on, we still wouldn't be able to adjust the colors accurately enough to increase saturation values alone. Instead we have to fall back on this hue saturation adjustment layer, and as I said before, you may benefit from using it especially when you've made big edits using levels or any command that affects brightness and contrast. Okay, things are looking pretty good here. I'm going to minimize this photograph and then head over to the bridge by hitting Ctrl-Shift-O here on the PC. That's Command-Shift-O on the Mac. Now I'm going to go ahead and open up this document called Neutral Colors. Now you may have heard me reference these so-called neutral colours in previous videos in this series, and coming up when we start using the eyedroppers you're going to hear it said quite a lot more. So I figured that we should spend some time, or a couple of moments at the very least, discussing the notion of neutral colours here inside Photoshop. Now the first thing I'm going to do is make sure the info palette is visible over here in the palette cluster, just so we can keep a track on these RGB values as I move my cursor over this document. And the next thing I'm going to do is press the letter M on the keyboard to select the marquee tool, just so we can see where I'm aiming at as clearly as possible. Okay, now just to explain what's going on here. In the middle section we have a range of 9 neutral colours, ranging from white up here, going through the middle greys all the way down to black at the bottom. Each shade of grey, by the way, is 32 brightness levels apart. Now if I hover above, say, this grey here, you can see in the info palette that we have a red, green and blue value of 128 brightness levels in each of the 3 colour channels, meaning that it is completely neutral. If I hover above any shade inside this neutral column, you'll see that all the red, green and blue values associated with this shade are exactly the same. Hence all of the shades being neutral. Now if we look at the yellow column, you may be able to see that all the shades now have a tinge of yellow to them, and that's because if we look over here to the info palette, all of these shades contain more red and green compared to the blue value, and each way you look at this you're always going to end up with more yellow. When you add red and green you make yellow, when you subtract blue you make yellow. So we're actually going to have a slight yellow cast associated with this column because of the RGB values up here in the info palette. The same goes with the blue column. Here we have blue as the dominant colour in all these shades, giving us a slightly blue cast. If I hover the mouse above this shade, for example, we have a value of 224 in the red and green channels, but a value of 234 in the blue channel. Okay, now I'm going to add a levels adjustment layer to the image, and we're met with this peculiar looking histogram, and that's okay. I'm going to select this middle eyedropper tool down here, which actually goes ahead and automatically neutralizes any shades of grey we click on. So if I go ahead and click on any of these neutral greys, nothing's going to change. and that's because the shade is already neutral. If I go ahead and click on this shade in the yellow column, however, we change the shade from a value of 128.128.118 to 124.124.125, which has gone a long way into making it more neutral. By doing that, we also affect the other shades within the image to a lesser degree, as the values fall into white and black respectively. We can also set the whites and blacks to true white and true black by using the white and black eyedroppers found down here as well. And just in the way of a quick example, I'll select the eyedropper to set a white point, and then click inside this shade of blue up here that we actually want white, and there we have it. Now we have a value of 255 in all three colour channels, and that shade is now a neutral colour here inside our document. Okay, so what have we learned from neutral colours here inside this video? When the RGB values of the image are the same, we have a neutral colour. The more they differ, the less neutral that colour is actually going to be. Okay, in the next video we're looking at these eyedroppers in a little more detail and working out where they can help us improve our images. Once again, I hope you found this video tutorial on freephotoshop.com to be helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.